Hello and welcome to the USD webinar. My name is Noor Ahmed and I'm happy to welcome you to our webinar. The aim today is to provide you with information so that you can prepare yourself for mastering the future dated requirements. We will show you as well why you should not underestimate the future dated requirements. So in general, the aim is today to give you an overview about some of the future dated requirements with the highest implementation effort. And we will give you also some hints regarding the prioritization, and we will try to give you some best practice tips for an efficient preparation. So if you have during this webinar some questions, right, we will have at the end of our webinar a Q&A slot, right? There you can ask your questions. So another point is that you don't have to take any notes. The slides will be sent to you after this webinar. So enjoy this webinar. So something about my person. My name is, like I mentioned before, Noor Ahmed, and I work as a senior consultant for USD AG in the area of security audits and PCI. I've been conducting PCI DSS audits now for several years, and I'm also a QSA. So I'm quite familiar with the topics around PCI DSS. Okay, so how do we do this? I will briefly present you the timeline, the current timeline regarding the PCI DSS standard and where we currently are standing, and maybe what kind of changes have developed in the last months and years. So we start with the first point, right, with March 2022. Here was the release of the PCI DSS version 4.0. Here it was published. The next milestone is the sunset date of the PCI version 3.2.1, so nearly 3 months ago. So from April 2024, only PCI DSS audits with the version 4.0 can be performed and reported. In June 2024, the PCI version 4.0.1 was published. This standard is a minor revision, so it corrects formatting and typographical errors and clarifies the objective and the intention behind certain requirements and guidance. So the important thing here is to know that no new requirements are introduced and no existing ones are removed. But here we have also to mention something. We have, like I mentioned before, some clarifications regarding the objectives and the intentions, and this could, under circumstances, have impact on some requirements, right? But here we will update you with news posts and maybe also with a webinar regarding the new release of this PCI DSS standard. So the next milestone will be the sunset date of the PCI DSS standard in the version 4.0. So this standard will be retired on the 31st of December 2024. So until the end of 2024, both standards, the 4.0 and the other 4.0.1, will run parallel. So PCI DSS and the version 4 will be retired on the 31st of December 2024. After that point, PCI DSS and the version 4.0.1 will be only the active version of the PCI standard supported by the Council. So maybe you have now the question, does the PCI DSS version 4.0.1 change the 31st of March 2025 effective date for the new requirements? The answer is no. The limited revision does not impact the effective date of these new future dated requirements. So we still have time till the 31st of March 2025 to fulfill the future dated requirements. Okay, let's have the current status, right? Let's assume you have conducted already your first PCI version 4 assessment, right? And you have fulfilled the mandatory requirements, right? Okay, maybe you have also included a gap analysis to check the status of the fulfillment of the future dated requirement. But nevertheless, let's check the requirements which you already have fulfilled. The first requirement is about the roles and responsibilities for performing PCI DSS requirements and to document them, to assign them, and also, of course, to understand them. So smaller companies will not have such troubles with performing this task in comparison to bigger organizations, right? Because there you have more teams and you have to identify the correct teams for the corresponding requirements. The next requirement will be the documentation of the scope at least once every 12 months and upon significant changes to the scope, PCI scope. If you have used the customized approach, right, to fulfill some of the requirements, you have also to use a targeted risk analysis. Just as a reminder, we have two ways to fulfill a requirement. On the one hand, we have the defined approach. So it's the traditional approach with defined testing requirements within PCI DSS. So if an entity, for example, cannot meet defined requirements, a compensating control may be used. On the other hand, we have the customized approach. This customized approach focuses more on the objective of each requirement and allows entities to fulfill requirements in other ways as defined by the PCI DSS. So, but here the testing procedures need to be derived by the assessor and the entity. The last requirement is the requirement 12.9.2, right? So here we need to have a documentation of requirements that are shared between the organization and the third-party service providers, right? So the third-party service providers support their customer requests with information to meet the requirements 12.0.8.4 and 12.8.5. And this requirement is only applicable for service providers. Okay. The next point are the future dated requirements, right? We have different types of the future dated requirements. On the one hand, we have the procedural requirements, right? For example, security policies, processes, incident response plans, risk assessments, and awareness trainings. And on the other hand, we have the technical requirements. For example, the encryption of cardholder data, access controls, the securing of our network configuration, logging, monitoring, or vulnerability management. Like for everything in life, if we want to achieve a goal, we do have to have an approach, a strategic approach or a plan, right? And if we also want to fulfill our future dated requirements, we need to have a strategic approach. The first step is to confirm the scope and to understand the requirements. So the first step, we should review the current PCI DSS documentation to really understand the future dated requirements. And on the other hand, we have to identify the impact, right? So we have to determine how these requirements will maybe impact our current systems, processes, and our compliance status. In the second step, we need to develop a compliance plan, right? So in the first, we should have a gap analysis. And with this gap analysis, if we have conducted, we can identify what changes are needed to meet the future dated requirement and what is currently the status quo. In the next step, it's important to develop a detailed action plan that outlines the steps needed to address each gap, including timeline, resources, and responsibilities. So if we have done this, it's now time to implement the necessary changes. Maybe we have to upgrade systems, right? To upgrade or replace any systems or technologies that do not meet with the new future dated requirements. Also, we need to have policy updates. So maybe we need to update or create new policies and procedures to align with the new requirements. Also, our employees need to have training, right, on the new requirements and to any changes to policies or procedures. After the implementation of the necessary changes, right, it's important that we test and validate our changes. This could be done during with the help of an internal testing to ensure that all changes are effective and meet the new requirements. Or we can engage a qualified security assessor, a QSA, to validate our compliance with the new requirements before they come into effect. After that, it's also important that we monitor and maintain our status, right? So with the implementation of a continuous monitoring, we ensure our ongoing compliance with all PCI DSS requirements. With the help of the regular reviews, right, we can update our compliance status and address maybe new vulnerabilities or changes in the requirements. Moreover, it's important that we engage with our stakeholders, right? Clearly, communication helps here a lot, right? We should communicate our compliance plans and progresses to all relevant stakeholders, including management, IT staff, and third-party vendors. We should try also to seek for feedback, right? Because gather feedback from stakeholders helps to identify any potential issues or improvement in our compliance approach. Moreover, it's important that we maintain our records of our changes, right? This helps with the help of those records. On one hand, we help our assessor during the audit, and it helps also to ensure that we have everything documented. The last point is seeking for updates regarding the PCI DSS standard, right? So we should regularly check for updates and guidance from the PCI Council, right? So it's important to stay here informed also about industry best practices and emerging security threats that may impact our compliance efforts. So on the one hand, we can follow the updates of the council. On the other hand, we have also maybe the chance of getting in touch with the USD webinars, right? So you can follow them and try also to have an eye on our news posts, right? Okay. So in the next slide, we will present you an overview of some of the future dated requirements, right? Which will be effective on April 2025. Please consider that we have picked 9 future dated requirements where we think that those future dated requirements will have a high effort that those future dated requirements need to be addressed as early as possible, right? Please have in mind regarding your scope, it could be that some of those requirements do not fall under your scope, right? And you do not have to fulfill them. Therefore, it could be that some other requirements have, in your case, a higher prioritization than those which I will present to you, right? Okay. The first one is the use of keyed cryptographic hashes. So if you generate and store hashes of PAN, right, then these now need to be cryptographically keyed hashes, for example, HMAC and GMAC. And if a lot of applications and systems, right, are related to these hashes, right, then you will have a higher effort of implementing those keyed cryptographic hashes. The next 2 requirements are the requirements for the prevention and the detection of e-commerce web skimming attacks, right? So the first requirement, 6.4.3, says that all scripts that are loaded on the payment page must be inventorialized and managed. So you need to have, for every script, you need to have an authorization, an inventory, and also a justification, right? This is relevant for all scripts that are loaded from the merchant's environment, but also for scripts that are loaded from third parties, right? And of course, this can represent at the end of the day more effort. The other requirement is the requirement 11.6.1, right? So this requirement states that you should have mechanisms to detect changes in the HTTP headers and payment pages on a weekly basis or on the basis of your own risk analysis. So changes to the payment page and HTTP header should be detected, right? So by actively managing all JavaScript, including in payment page web pages, and responding to unauthorized changes, let's assume with many websites having around 100 scripts on a page, and half of these are from third parties, right? These requirements may prove harder to meet than you might initially think. Okay, the next requirements is regarding the handling of technical accounts, right? So these have previously been ignored by the PCI DSS, but historically have been a major cause of system compromises. Now, those technical accounts needs to be managed, reviewed, and secured. It can be for some organization that these requirements will only be able to meet by the use of a privileged access management solution. The next requirement, which also is categorized as with high, is that if disk or partition level encryption is used to render PAN unreadably, then disk or partition level encryption isn't acceptable anymore. So disk encryption is not sufficient anymore. The next requirement is the requirement regarding of the prevention of PAN copying when you use a remote access technology. What is the meaning of remote access, right? The PCI version 4 glossa says access to an entity's network from a location outside of that network. An example of a technology for remote access is, for example, VPN, right? So when you are using remote access technologies, technical controls prevent the copy or relocation of PANs for all personnel, except for those with a documented and explicit authorization and legitimate defined business need. The next requirement, which is categorized with medium, is the MFA, so the multi-factor authentication for all non-console CDE access. So now this is required for all users who access the CDE, not just for remote and administrative access. The next two requirements can be combined. They are regarding the vulnerability management, right? So the requirement 11.3.1.2 says that internal vulnerability scans must be authenticated scans, right? But of course, if you are using authenticated scans, right, it can result in more findings. And the requirement 11.3.1.1 says that other applicable vulnerabilities, those which are not ranked as high or critical, with high risk or critical by the entity's vulnerability risk ranking, right? So this is the meaning of the requirement of the vulnerabilities which are ranked with low and medium should now also be managed. The next requirement, which is also categorized with medium, is the TRR, the targeted risk analysis, right? So as far as you know, the PCI DSS offers companies the opportunity to determine the frequency in which they implement the required activities for certain requirements. In order to determine an appropriate frequencies, companies must conduct a targeted risk analysis, right? So under certain circumstances, right, this requirement could also bring a lot of effort with it. Okay, let's take a look on some best practices regarding the key cryptographic hashing, right? As a starting point, we should firstly identify all scenarios and contexts where PAN hashes are currently in use, right? We should definitely evaluate the necessity of PAN hashes, right? Have in mind, if you don't need it, don't store it. Another important point is that key management procedures require also the rotating of the hashing key regularly, right? This can lead to different hash values for the same PAN. Depending on the user scenario, right, this may break certain functions or require adaptations to the implementation because the hash value of the same PAN has changed now and it's difficult to find this same PAN because now you have two different hash values, for example. With the new PCI DSS version 4.0.1 standard, we have here also a little change, right? Now the customized approach could also be used for this requirement and could be a really good alternative. The next requirement are the requirements regarding the prevention and the detection of web skimming attacks, right? So firstly, we should identify all payment pages where we have an implementation with an iframe, right? Because if we have payment pages with the implementation of a redirect, those payment pages do not fall under this requirement. So we can also use sub-resource integrity, SRE, and content security policies can be used as a self-developed approach, right? But of course, if you are using SRE, right, it's combined with a relative high effort and a risk that the payment page is simply broken or could not be delivered because hashes of a third-party script have changed. So an alternative, which would be an easier way, would be to use a compliant commercial solution, right, to manage and to secure the scripts on the payment pages. So most of those commercial solutions work with an approach of the behavior-based, right? And I think this behavior-based approach will help a lot here. In the next slide, we have the handling of technical accounts. So first, we should also here identify all technical accounts on all system components in the PCI DSS scope. We should consider the need of those accounts. We should also check if there are passwords or passphrases for these accounts are stored in clear text in any kind of files, right? If this is the case, then we should, of course, not do that because it's not allowed anymore. And in the next step, we should try to configure our technical accounts, if possible, without the option of interactive login. So if we should, or if it's necessary that we use the interactive login for the technical accounts, right, then we should use a commercial PAM solution, which stands for Privileged Access Management, to manage the password for the cases where interactive logging of technical accounts is necessary. This would guarantee accountability and traceability. Like I mentioned before, disk encryption is not sufficient anymore. So we should identify which applications in our scope rely on this encryption to secure cardholder data. So we should try to evaluate the best encryption solution for the respective scenario. So here there are different solutions which can be used, for example, tokenization, application encryption, database encryption, or dedicated data security solution. With the new PCI DSS standard in the version 4.0.1, also for the fulfilling of this requirement, the customized approach is now possible to use. The next point is the point regarding the prevention of PAN copying when using remote access technologies. So this means that you cannot copy PANs locally on your device when you work remotely, right? So First of all, it's necessary to identify how user access the CDE remotely. So you should try to examine the options to restrict the copying of data via remote access solutions, right? So remote access means in this case, for example, VPN or Citrix. The access to web GUIs or web application is not considered as remote access, and this requirement does here not apply. There may exist specific user groups with a legitimate business need, for example, to download PANs to their local devices. So keep in mind that the implemented solution to prevent copying of PANs via remote access technology must be able to differentiate between these users and others who are not allowed to copy the PAN locally, for example. The next requirement is the requirement regarding the usage of MFA for all non-console CDE access. So in the first step, we should identify all user and non-administrative access to the CDE systems and application. And of course, we should check if MFA is already in place, right? A related requirement, right, which we should also mention here is the requirement 8.5.1, right? And this requirement states that the MFA solution, which is in use, right, should be also resistant regarding reply attacks, right? So even if you are using, for example, a commercial solution, you should deal with this at an early stage and clarify the requirements with your provider if necessary, and if your provider, for example, do not offer this option, right? So this is here also important. Okay. Moreover, it's important to know that this requirement also applies to customer if they have access to the CDE systems or applications. Consider also the reuse of existing MFA solutions for other groups and customers, right? What is also a good best practice is the adaptation of the central gateway implementing MFA for all CDE access, right? So you have the CDE only on one point, right, from which all user access the CDE. The next topic would be the changes to vulnerability management and scans, right? First of all, before you start, you should first analyze which system do you have in your scope, right? Which of them can be scanned? Which of them cannot be scanned? And why can those not be scanned, right? Because systems that are unable to accept credential for the authenticated scanning should be documented, right? So you should also try to examine your current scanning solution regarding options for the authenticated scanning, right? This could also be, for example, agent-based for servers, for example, for Linux and Windows. And if network-based scanning is used, for example, through SSH, the credentials for the used technical accounts must also be managed securely. So, as I stated before, authenticated scans can result in general in more findings. In combination with the requirement to address low and medium finding, this may lead to a significant higher workload for the vulnerability management. The next requirement would be the requirement regarding the targeted risk analysis, right? As you know, the PCI DSS offers companies the opportunity to determine the frequency in which they implement the required activities for certain requirements. In order to determine an appropriate frequency, companies must conduct a targeted risk analysis, right? So here's our tip for you. First, you should review the threat level and the potential damage level for the relevant requirements regularly. Moreover, there is a guidance from the council which is more appropriate, right, and which could be used. It's called the TRA guidance, right? You will find this guidance in the document side of the PCI Council. So based on that, you can then select the frequency for the required activities based on your assessment and document your results, right? So moreover, I can recommend you here highly the webinar of my colleague Tobias Weber, who has had a webinar in the last days regarding this topic. Additionally, yesterday our marketing colleagues have also published a news post regarding this topic. Okay, so the strategic best practice here. Benjamin Franklin once said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail, right? So now we know that we have to prioritize our future dated requirements. So firstly, we should understand our environment and try to find out the status quo, right, with a gap analysis to identify which changes are needed to meet the future dated requirements. And the next step, it's important that we have an action plan and milestones and defined milestones. So we should develop a detailed action plan that outlines the steps needed to address each gap, including the timelines, the resources, and also the responsibilities. And in the last step, we should try to test and validate our changes, right? So we should conduct internal testing to ensure that all of our changes are effective and meet the new requirements. So now we have time for our Q&A, so you can use the chat and ask your questions. In the meantime, I want to present you here 2 ways how you can stay informed regarding updates. On the one side, we have our LinkedIn page, right, where we inform you in regular dates regarding new webinars, right? And of course, we inform you there about updates regarding the PCI DSS standard and co. Moreover, we have also the website of our CSD Academy, right? In this website, you will also get a lot of information regarding upcoming webinars. And yeah, so. Okay, I will try to answer here some questions. The first question was, what commercial solutions for fulfillment of web skimming attacks can you recommend, right? So here are some commercial solutions exist which are already PCI compliant, for example, source defense, human, or JScrambler, but of course there exist as well other compliant solutions. Okay. The next question is, if we have been audited on June 2024, do we need to be compliant with the new requirements for March 2025, or only for the next audit in June 2025, right? So if you have conducted your audit in June 2024, right, it's as the following, right? So you still have till the 31 of March 2025 time to fulfill the future dated requirements, right? Okay, here is a question regarding the templates. Are there already ROC templates for the new PCI version 4.0.1 standard, right? So here it's also interesting to know that the PCI DSS Council has published an information that the new reporting template for the version 4.0.1 will be published together with new SRQs in Q3. So stay tuned. If they publish them, we will inform you. Another question is here, what would be approximately be the ratio of efforts between the gap analysis and the implementation phase, right? So this is a little bit difficult to answer because at the end of the day, it depends on the number of future dated requirements which you have to fulfill and which kind of future dated requirements you need to address, right? And of course, it also depends on your resources, right? On the teams, have they capacities to fulfill and to adapt these future dated requirements? If yes, then I would firstly try to find out which kind of resources do we have, right? Where is our status quo, right? And if we have those two information, then we can go ahead with the implementation phase and also determine exact milestones for the implementation. But of course, after the gap analysis, I don't try to have let's say a long gap between the gap analysis and the implementation, right? Because after the implementation, you need also to test the changes to evaluate them and to test them to know if those future dated requirements have been implemented in the correct way. Okay. Here's also a question, but this question goes in another way. Therefore, I will not answer this question. But here's another question regarding the alternative to key cryptographic hashing, right? So an alternative to key cryptographic hashing would be, for example, to the use of tokens, right? If you use tokens, it's a good way because here you also do not need to have a key rotation when you are using tokens. Okay. I think we have nearly addressed all questions. So thank you very much again for your time. If you have, or if you need help with the implementation of the future dated requirements, for example, if you need help here with templates or with general consulting, or for example, with a third-party assessment, do not hesitate to contact us, right? We are glad to help you, and thank you very much for your time, and enjoy your day and the sunny weather. Thank you.